Perceval and the origin of the Grail quest. Perceval, or the story of the Grail, first appeared in a work by Chrétien de Troyes in the 12th century. The story follows the life of an initially foolish boy who had been hidden from the world by his mother, for fear that he would become a knight like his father. After finding his way in life, he stumbled upon a magical castle deep in the forest that only appears to those spiritually ready. And it is here that he was presented with the Grail, its first mention in world history. The boy, it turned out, was destined to heal the wounded king of the castle, who was kept alive by the Grail. To heal the king, Perceval only had to ask a simple question, but not knowing the rules of the spiritual plane, he failed to do so. And as a result, the castle disappeared, and the king remained in intolerable pain. And consequently, his land remained a wasteland. So you might wonder, what question did he fail to ask? And what was this magical Grail exactly? And what was this magical castle doing in the wilderness? These questions add to the eerie sense of mystery that runs through the story, that the great composer Wagner would later turn into phenomenal music in the 19th century. Understandably, the story quickly spread throughout Europe and even became the blueprint for a new type of adventure, the spiritual quest. Let's now study this story in depth. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start. As far as we know, the story of Perceval originated with the poet Chrétien de Troyes, who flourished in the second half of the 12th century. But unfortunately, Chrétien never finished his story, which led various later authors to write their own endings. Chrétien also left many questions unanswered, which also prompted many later writers to add their own spin on the story. Eventually, the story morphed into something quite unrecognizable, with even the hero swapped from the foolish Perceval to the always perfect Sir Galahad. And the story also became Christianized over time, linking the Grail, for instance, to the cup which caught the blood of Christ during crucifixion. In this lecture, we'll mostly use Chrétien's version of the story, combined with the masterful German version called Perceval, as this version often gives additional insights into the story. The German version was written not long after the original in the early 13th century by the poet-knight Wolfram von Eschenbach. And here we see Wolfram with a squire in a famous German medieval manuscript. As is a common trope in the Middle Ages, Wolfram insists that Chrétien had not told the story correctly. He instead claimed to have obtained the story from a man named Meister Quiot, who supposedly traveled to Muslim Spain, where he found the tale in a heathen script, as he calls it, written by a Muslim astronomer named Phlegetanis, who supposedly read the secret of the Grail from the stars. His insistence on a Muslim source is interesting here. It reflects Europe's obsession at the time with the advanced Islamic science that was flooding into Europe via Spain. And in his text, Wolfram also regularly flaunts his knowledge of these sciences, of mineralogy, medicine, and astronomy. Wolfram's understanding of Islam, however, is comically incomplete. He believes them to be heathens who pray to Roman gods and goddesses, and he even claimed Phlegetanis worshipped a calf as though it was a god. Now let's start with the story. The story in both versions begins with a boy named Perceval, or Perceval, who grew up with his mother in the forest. The boy's father was of royal descent, but had lost his wealth and was cast into exile. When two of his sons died in battle, he died from grief. Wanting to protect the only son she had left, the boy's mother hid him in the forest and taught him nothing about knighthood. He wasn't even told his own name, in hopes he would stay unaware of his claim to the throne. But one day the boy encountered 5 knights who were passing through the forest. Seeing their shiny helmets, lances and shields, the boy believed he had seen a god. He flung himself to the ground and recited the prayers that his mother had taught him. But then the knights explained to him that they were knights knighted by King Arthur. The boy then hurried back home to tell his mother that he too wanted to become a knight. His mother tried to persuade him not to go, but the boy had made up his mind. As a last resort, she deliberately dressed him in a fool's garb, made of coarse material, hoping that he soon would be embarrassed and turn home. Perceval, who Wolfram calls foolish yet worthy, was also unaware of much of the etiquette of society, causing him to make many mistakes along his journey. For instance, he was told to offer greetings to everyone he met, which he did in a very childish manner, adding each time, "So my mother advised me." In Wolfram, Perceval was also told to avoid dark streams, causing him to avoid even a stream a chicken could have easily stepped across, as the text says. In both versions, he also kisses a married woman and even steals her ring, misinterpreting his mother's advice to win a good woman's ring. Soon after leaving home, Perceval found a lady crying in deep sorrow with her husband lying dead on her lap. The husband, he is told, was killed during a joust. The woman then revealed herself to be his aunt, named Sigjun by Wolfram. She also tells Perceval about his real name and his father's royal lineage. This scene has something deeply mysterious that I think Wagner also tried to capture in his music. What is that woman doing there in the middle of the forest, crying without seeming to want to go anywhere? And as we shall see, we'll meet her again and again, each time in a more mysterious fashion. On his way to Arthur's court, Perceval saw a knight in red armor carrying a golden cup which he had stolen from Arthur. Once inside the castle, the naive Perceval demanded to be knighted in that red armor that he had seen outside. Sir Kay, one of the knights of the Round Table, sarcastically told him to challenge the Red Knight and take his armor. Taking the joke seriously, the boy marched outside, and after a short joust, he threw a javelin through the Red Knight's eye and brain, and then he captured his new armor. Continuing his journey in his new armor, he stumbled upon the castle of a man named Gorneman, or Gurnemans by Wolfram, who taught him how to conduct himself as a proper knight. Perceval eagerly accepted his teachings, as his mother had given him the advice to listen to wise grey men who were willing to teach him about courtesy. Gorneman, for instance, advised him to grant mercy in battle when a knight was no longer able to defend himself, and, quote, not to be too talkative. These tips, Gorneman believed, would help Perceval avoid his many blunders. A little later, Perceval stumbled upon the castle of Gorneman's niece Blanchefleur, or named Kundry in Wolfram. Blanchefleur's land, it turned out, was under attack. Perceval defeated her enemy, and the two fell in love. They then lay together in bed, although neither of them knew what to do, the text says. Promising to return, Perceval then continued his journey. He then took off into the wilderness. In Chrétien we read, "He rode on, lance at the ready, as fully armed as the day he came. He continued on his way without meeting a living soul, neither man nor woman, who could direct him on his travels." So he's utterly in the middle of nowhere. In Wolfram, interestingly, he let the horse ride on its own accord. We read, "Forcibly the horse dragged the reins over fallen tree trunks and through the marsh, for no man's hand guided it." The adventure makes known to us that in the course of that day he rode so far that a bird would have been hard put to fly all that distance. Would you like to hear now how things stand with him, with Perceval. How that evening he came to a lake. Then, on this lake in the middle of nowhere, he caught sight of a boat drifting with two men in it. The man in front, we read, was fishing with a line, baiting his hook with a little fish. Perceval then asked the man for a place to stay, and he was given directions to their castle. At first he couldn't find the place. Quote, he looked all around him and saw only sky and earth and said, "What have I come for? Deceit and trickery! May God bring shame today on him who sent me here." But then he caught sight of the top of a tower. It was square in construction of dark stone, with two turrets flanking it. A drawbridge lowered, and inside he found the same old man, seated upon a bed before a large fire. The man told him he couldn't rise to greet him because of his wounds. He was now introduced as the Fisher King, and in Wolfram he also gets the name Amfortas. Then a squire came in with a sword and offered it to Perceval. Another squire then entered, carrying a bleeding white lance, followed by two squires with a candelabra. And then this is what happened next. A maiden, accompanying the two young men, was carrying a grail. She was beautiful, noble, and richly attired. After she had entered the hall carrying the grail, the room was so brightly illuminated that the candles lost their brilliance, like stars and the moon when the sun rises. The grail was of fine, pure gold. Set in the grail were precious stones of many kinds. In Chrétien's version of the story, the grail is described as a serving dish with holy content that illuminated the room. In the later Christianized versions, the grail would turn from a dish into a cup, and then the grail itself would become holy, not just its content. We then read in Chrétien that Perceval observed the marvel, but he refrained from asking what the meaning of the grail was, remembering Gorneman's advice to be reserved in his speech, not to be too talkative. The young knight watched them pass by, but did not dare to ask who was served from the grail. We continue. The grail passed by completely uncovered before him, but he did not learn who was served from it, though he wanted to know. He said to himself that he would be sure to ask one of the court squires before he left there. And that was his big mistake. He did not follow his empathetic instincts. In Wolfram, we also read that when the procession returned to the room from which it came, he saw in that room Titurel, the grandfather of Amfortas. We read, lying on a camp bed, he saw in a chamber, before they closed the door behind them, the most handsome old man of whom he ever gained knowledge. Very strange, how could an old man be so full of life? After the procession, he was offered a great meal and then a place to sleep. When he awoke, the castle was mysteriously empty. He looked everywhere, but no one could be found. He then decided to look outside, quote, to see whether any of them would explain to him why the lance bled and tell him where the grail was carried. As he crossed the drawbridge, it lifted by itself, barely allowing him to reach the other side. When he then yelled out who had raised the bridge, no one answered. In Wolfram it's a bit different. Here a hidden squire closed the gate and then shouted at him, "You're a goose! If only you'd open your mouth and question the host. It has cost you much fame." Thinking perhaps that the knights of the castle had gone out for a fight, Perceval sought to join them. He followed their trails, but they soon dispersed and disappeared, mysteriously. Riding off into the forest, far from civilization, he again accidentally bumped into the mysterious maiden Sigyn. In Wolfram, she is sitting in a tree, as some hermits in the Middle Ages did, with her dead husband also there, who by that time was mysteriously embalmed. She was surprised to see anyone in this desolate area. She said, "They say that one could ride for 25 leagues in the direction from which you're coming without finding a good, honest and proper lodging place. Yet your horse's belly is so full and his coat so shining. that he couldn't appear more satisfied or his coat smoother had he been washed and combed and given a bed of hay and oats. And it appears to me that you yourself have had a comfortable and restful night. And in Wolfram, Sigyn states, "Then she asked whence he had come, and he told her of the castle. 'It is a mile or so from here,' he said. 'Do not lie to me,' Sigyn answered. 'For 30 miles around, no hand has touched here, either stone or tree, save for a single rich castle, that many seek but none has found. For he who seeks will not find it, yet many people are seen to seek it. It must happen unwittingly if anyone is ever to see that castle. I believe, sir, it is not known to you. Monsalvash it is called.'" When the maiden discovered that Perceval had indeed seen the magical Grail castle, she was happy, believing he must have lifted the curse of the wounded king. But she then learns that he had not asked the question. She reacted in horror. "Dishonest, accursed man! You should have taken pity on your host." She then explained to him about the Fisher King. He was wounded and maimed in the course of a battle, so that he can no longer manage on his own. For he was struck by a javelin through both thighs, and is still in so much pain that he cannot ride a horse. Whenever he wants to relax or go out and enjoy himself, he has himself put in a boat and goes fishing with a hook. And this is in fact where we identify the king in the boat with the Fisher King in the castle. In Wolfram's version, we read that the king suffered because he had broken the rules. As a young knight, he had gone questing not for God, but for the love of a lady, using the battle cry Amor, or love. As punishment, he had been pierced by a poisoned spear through his testicles. Then, through God's help, the Fisher King was brought to the Grail, which kept him alive. The maiden Sigyn then told Perceval 2 pieces of bad news. Firstly, that his mother had died of grief because of his departure. And secondly, that he had made a grave mistake by failing to ask the king about the lands and the Grail. If he had done so, he would have lifted the curse that was plaguing the king. We read, "Perceval the wretched, how unfortunate you were when you failed to ask all this, because you would have brought great aid to the good king who is maimed. He would have totally regained the use of his limbs and ruled his lands, and much good would have come of it." But Perceval could not understand what he had done wrong, and neither can we, the audience. Gurneman's advice to restrain his speech had been useful in the world of men, in the world of the Round Table. But, as it turns out, and this is not explained explicitly in the book, Gurneman's advice was not sufficient for the deeper spiritual world through which Sigyn and the Grail Castle belong. A very deep mythological motive. Not knowing what to do next, Perceval headed back to Arthur's court. Not long after, an ugly, deformed damsel named Kundry by Wolfram entered on a mule. She too cursed Perceval in the hardest terms and told him about the consequences of his mistake. Quote, "And do you know the consequences of the king not ruling and not being healed of his wounds? Ladies lose their husbands, lands will be laid waste, and maidens will remain helpless as orphans. Many a knight will die. All these troubles will occur because of you." And this motif, by the way, that the health of the king was directly connected to the health of his land and the people in it, came from Celtic mythology. As the king had sinned, he turned his kingdom into a barren wasteland. And now turn to Wolfram. In his description of Kundry, he connects her to Islamic science. He writes, "The maiden's learning vouchsafed that she spoke all languages well, Latin, heathen, meaning Arabic, and French. She had a cultivated mind, encompassing dialectic and geometry. Known to her too were the skills of astronomy. She was called Kundry. Her byname was Sorcière, sorcerer or witch. She was nosed like a dog. 2 boar's teeth stuck from her mouth." Kundry told Perceval, "You are destined for hell," although Wolfram does remind us that Perceval was not guilty of true treachery. Perceval himself claims, quote, I received the world's scorn because of my courtesy's command. Perceval had just followed Gorneman's advice to the best of his abilities, which he now realizes must be incomplete. In response to all these accusations, Perceval swore an oath to continue questing no matter the hardships, quote, until he had learned who was served from the Grail and had found the bleeding lands and had been told the true reasons why it bled. Over the next 5 years, Perceval wandered through the land, performing deeds of chivalry and going on unusual adventures. Yet after years had gone by without finding the Grail, we read that he, quote, no longer remembered God. In Wolfram we read, alas, what is God? If he were mighty, he would not have given us both such scorn. I served him as a subject, hoping for favor from him. Now I'll refuse him service. In Wolfram, Perceval also again meets Sigyn here, now in a hermit cell. I quote, he found a hermitess, Sigyn, who for the love of God had renounced her maidenhood and her joy. The warrior lay dead, buried within, that is within the cell. Perceval asked her to come to the window. The damsel, pale of complexion, courteously rose from her genuflection, that is, from her position of prayer. Perceval then asked how it is possible for her to live all the way out here in the wilderness. She answered, my meals come here from the Grail with no delay whatever. Kundry la Susière brings me my food. Believing Perceval had suffered enough, she then tells him Kundry had just left and gave him the direction she had taken. He tried to follow her, but he did not find her trail. But he did find, quote, a Knight Templar from Mille Sauvage, and that knight was defending his lord's forest. In the battle that ensued, Perceval lost his horse, but he managed to gain the knight's horse, a Grail horse, carrying the emblem of the Grail on its saddle. Again, a very mysterious scene. Then, on Good Friday, he encountered an old knight deep in the forest with his family, who were walking barefoot on a pilgrimage. The family showed him the way to a hermit named Trevisan by Wolfram, who had the power to forgive sins. We read, not too far ahead of you resides a holy man. He will give you counsel, penance for your misdeed. If you wish to tell him of your contrition, he will part you from sins. The hermit told Perceval he had sinned by letting his mother die of grief, and that on account of this sin he did not ask about the lands and the Grail. He was then told that both the hermit himself and the Fisher King were Perceval's uncles on his mother's side, and Sigyn was their sister. The hermit then advised Perceval to make peace with God. The hermit also told him more about the Grail, which he calls the Lapsit Exilis, which is actually corrupt Latin, so we cannot read it, but it could possibly mean something like a stone that fell from heaven. So here in Wolfram, but not in Chrétien, the Grail is not even a chalice, but a stone. This stone, we are told, could magically feed the inhabitants of the castle, again a Celtic motive. And the stone also had the power to prolong youth and delay death. Each Good Friday, we read, a dove brings a small white wafer from heaven and places it on the stone. The white wafer, it seems, is the wafer given during Mass. And the dove, which is also the emblem of the Grail Castle, is likely a symbol for the Holy Ghost. For the Holy Ghost in the New Testament also descends on Jesus in the form of a dove. The hermit then also mysteriously claims that the stone was brought to earth by neutral angels who sided with neither God nor Lucifer after Lucifer's rebellion and his fall from heaven. This story at the time was theologically quite daring. Why did those angels not pick the side of God? But we continue. After the Grail was put on earth, a dynasty of kings was put in charge of it, which includes, of course, the Fisher King. The hermit then also revealed that the Grail kept Titurol, the grandfather of Anfortas, alive. Chrétien tells about him, and do not imagine he is served pike or lamprey or salmon. A single host that is brought to him in that Grail sustains him and brings comfort to that holy man. Such is the holiness of the Grail. And he is so holy that his life is sustained by nothing more than the host that comes in the Grail. He has lived for 12 years like this, without ever leaving the room into which you saw the Grail enter. Unfortunately, Chrétien's story then breaks off mid-sentence. A later version by Robert de Baron from the 13th century continues the story. In Robert's version, Perceval confesses his sins to the Hermit, and then he encounters the wizard Merlin, who directs him back to the Grail castle. Witnessing the same procession once more, Perceval now asks the question, after which the Fisher King departed from the world and left Perceval behind as keeper of the Grail. Robert also added new Christian elements to the story, turning the Grail into a Holy Grail, the cup Christ drank from at the Last Supper. He also identified it with the cup used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch Christ's blood when he was on the cross. Although the Bible only mentions Joseph as the one who assumed responsibility for the burial of Jesus. According to Robert, Joseph of Arimathea also brought the Grail to England, to the realm of King Arthur. And now the bleeding lance. In the original story, the lance was probably the weapon that had struck the king, but it now became associated with the lance used by the Roman guard to poke Jesus' side to see if he had died. Now let's turn to Wolfram's version. After meeting the hermit in the forest and confessing his sins, Perceval encountered and fought an unknown knight. When Perceval broke his sword, his adversary granted him mercy. He then learned that the knight was his half-brother on his father's side, a man named Ferreves. His mother, we read, was a black Moorish queen or a Muslim queen, and as a result, Ferreves was half white and half black. And in his description of this man, we again see Wolfram's confusion about Islam. Ferreves, he says, is a believer in the goddess June and the god Jupiter, which is of course far removed from the actual Islamic faith. Back at Arthur's court, the ugly damsel Kundry appeared once more, but now she was wearing the Grail emblem on her garment. She then knelt before Perceval and told him that he had been called to become the Grail King. We quote, "She fell with the courtesy she possessed at Perceval's feet, beseeching him, all in tears, for his greeting, and that he might abandon anger towards her and pardon her. So she is now coming to him with a very different attitude." Perceval was then allowed to bring a companion to the Grail castle, and interestingly, he chooses his Muslim brother. Once in the castle, Ferreves could at first not see the Grail, but he could after he was baptized. Perceval then asked a question that freed Anfortas from his wounds. He says, "Uncle, what ails thee?" or "Uheim, was dirret dir" in German, which finally ended the curse. An inscription on the Grail then named Perceval as their king. He was soon joined by his wife and sons, and his son Lohengrin, by the way, would later succeed him as keeper of the Grail, and the composer Wagner in the 19th century would also compose a magical piece of work about this character Lohengrin. The Grail Knights, we then read, would continually ride out to maintain order in lands where the succession was in doubt because there was no male heir. Knights were sent secretly by the Grail to marry the heiresses of these lands and restore peace, but they had to return if they were asked what their name or lineage was, which is part of a whole other myth that is only alluded to in Perceval. Now let's end with a short description of another fantastic version of the story called La Quest de Saint Graal. Here we see an even stronger shift towards the religion than we saw in Robert de Boron, with extra emphasis on the spiritual teachings of hermits and without the damsels in distress. In this version, both Lancelot and Gawain try to capture the Grail, but they fail, while the ideal Christian knight Sir Galahad succeeds. Galahad encountered the Grail in the Middle East and was able to see, quote, "the marvel of all marvels therein," and afterward, both Galahad and the Grail ascended to heaven. And thus, my friends, unfolded the story of Perceval, the keeper of the Grail. Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe. If you want to know more about this story of many other topics from world history, read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can read it for free on worldhistorybook.com. See you there. Bye bye.